And the presenter is Ekaterina Alomasa.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kate, as you know, and today I will present our paper about causal impact of performance-based funding on university performance. I'll start with motivation of the study and research question. Then I proceed to theoretical framework and related literature. Then I will talk about our data and research strategy. And then I will conclude with some results and discussion section. So, over the last decades, many countries have been experiencing structural transformations of their higher education systems as well as their financial mechanisms. And one of the crucial goals of such reforms was to tie up amount of public funding with performance of universities. In Russia, such scheme was implemented in 2015. And by the way, before 2015, there was a negotiation-based approach. But since 2015, there is a formula which is based on performance of universities in previous periods. It means that the better you perform today, the higher amount of public funding you will get tomorrow. And this performance is measured by different performance indicators, such as average national examination scores, number of publications, share of foreign students, etc. Given the fact that overall public funding trend has been diminishing during the last several years, universities have to compete for scarce public financial resources. But you may ask, why would they compete? The thing is that performance-based funding is the largest part of total income of almost all universities in Russia. So technically, all universities have incentives to improve their performance. As a result of implementation of this policy, there was a redistribution of public money among universities, and some of them started gaining more money gradually, while others less. And the aim of this research is to analyze the causal effect of performance-based funding on policy on universities' performance. And research question might be formulated as follows: do more or extra funds lead to higher performance of universities in subsequent periods? There is a hot debate in literature regarding performance-based funding schemes in different countries and its effects on universities, on its performance and their financial strategies. But since in Russia it was implemented quite recently, it's still a question for estimation. And this study contributes to existing literature, first of all, by discussing the mechanism of performance-based funding in case of Russia. And secondly, and what is more important, we are trying to establish causality of the effect of the policy on universities' performance. We follow previous studies and apply a principal-agent theoretical framework here, and consider government or the ministry as a principal and universities as agents. The model has intertemporal nature. At the first stage, government set the rules and inform universities about contract conditions, what should be targeted, and how it would be rewarded in next periods. Then universities make an effort to maximize their performance. Then they measure it and report to the government, and then at the next period, government reward universities according to their performance. However, some universities may not deal successfully with these contract conditions due to several reasons. For example, incentives might be not sufficient or not clear, or university may not have enough capacity to maximize their performance. Before I proceed to our data and the research strategy, I should say that we totally understand that before 2015, universities were unequal in terms of performance. Some of them perform better, and as a consequence, they have higher chances to be treated and to get more funds after implementation of this reform. But our methodology allow us to estimate the effect of extra funding on performance of universities, and at the same time eliminate the effect of pretreatment performance of universities on the amount of public funding, and at the same time control for universities' heterogeneity in terms of number of students, in terms of total income and performance as well. Our data comes from two sources. Data on performance indicators comes from the annual monitoring of universities' performance, and data on financial indicators comes from the Ministry of Education and Science database, and that is why our sample is restricted to approximately 200 universities under the Ministry of Education and Science authority only. But still, student body of these universities is representing approximately 60% of total number of students in public universities in Russia. Our research strategy contains two steps. At first step is devoted to classify universities into groups with different trends of performance-based funding during 2015 and 2018. We consider university as a winner if it has positive trend of performance-based funding. Otherwise, it becomes loser. We also have universities with unstable trend, and we call them no-trend universities. To differentiate between these three groups, we apply time series clustering analysis. The idea is simple. At first stage, we just estimate the similarity measures of each two university strands, and then we apply a simple Kamin clustering algorithm. And here are the results of the first step. So after clustering, we were able to distinguish 67 winners, 72 losers, and 75 universities without trend. And ANOVA test shows that winners perform better. They show higher performance according to all indicators, while there is no significant difference between losers and universities without trend. And as a second step, we estimate causal effect by applying difference in difference approach. Firstly, let me briefly introduce the idea of this method. Difference in difference is usually used to evaluate the effect of treatment or policy intervention. In our case, treatment is getting more funding, since the reform was implemented. And that is why, in our case, treatment group is winners, and control group is not universities without trend. And we do not take into account losers here because they somehow negatively treatment also. So the idea of difference in difference method to compare changes of outcome variables over time between these two groups, between treatment and control groups. And one of the crucial assumptions here is parallel trend assumption, which means that in the absence of treatment, both groups should follow the same trends. However, since our treatment is non-random and universities has different chances, they have different probabilities to be treated, the real intervention effect might be less than this that we will get using conventional difference in difference approach. That is why we apply semi-parametrical difference in difference approach. The idea is firstly to weight changes in outcome variables by their propensity scores, by their probability to be treated, and then at the second step, compare these weighted changes over time between treatment and control groups. And here are results. First of all, let's take a close look at the first model, which is estimation of simple average treatment effect. The results suggest that there is positive significant effect of extra funds on almost all performance indicators, except salary ratio and external R&D income and total R&D income per academic staff. But then we made a step further and assumed that different universities with different characteristics may experience different effects. These characteristics are status of universities, leading or non-leading, location of university, Moscow and St. Petersburg or different region, and share of performance-based funding in total income of university. The results suggest that leading universities, as well as Moscow and St. Petersburg universities, experience higher effect than regional universities and non-leading. Results also suggest that the higher share of performance-based funding in total income of university, the lower the effect. But then we made another step further and eliminate leading universities from our sample and estimate on simulate the model only on subsample of regional universities. And then there is no statistical significant effect on all indicators except national examination scores. It means that universities has only clear incentives to be more selective and to attract higher quality students in subsequent periods. Now let's discuss our results a little bit. First of all, what we observe here is that policy have statistical significant effect only for leading universities and universities that allocated in Moscow or St. Petersburg. And there is no statistical significant effect on regional universities. It means that such universities are not able to successfully convert extra funding into performance improvement. And there are several reasons for that. For example, incentives might be not clear or not sufficient, but there is one more possible explanation of that. The thing is that universities have additional constraints like students to academic staff ratio, etc. And the whole production function is too difficult to maximize for them. So I think I will stop here. For your attention. You're welcome with your questions and comments.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions?
It's not the exact question, maybe some question and comment if possible. I think it's interesting thought come to me, maybe it's not so, but if you can calculate the premium on investments in universities, so if you speak about, we can calculate the effect. So the opposite is also possible. So we can take the final targets indicators in the national project, for example, science or education, and try to calculate the necessary volume of funding for one university, so we can know the proportion. So it's right direction of thought or not?
I think it's possible to do, but we didn't think about.
It depends on the particular set of indicators that we have in this national.
For example, we speak about the results of science indicators. So we speak about the publications. We know the target for the publications. We know the correlation with the funding. So we can make the opposite calculation. It's very interesting because it can support or not support the first calculation in the national project, because we know the result of such estimate of efficiency thinking.
I think maybe I just add to the answer, because except this quantitative analysis, we also conducted a couple of interviews with universities managers who are responsible for managing financial resources and so on. And actually, this mechanism does not work like, I'm university manager and I can calculate. So if I will produce initial publication next year, it will bring me this amount of money. It doesn't work like this. And that's why I think it's very difficult to use this way of reasoning that you are suggesting that we have a target and we can calculate how much money we need to achieve this target.
Thank you.
As you have said, that there are three sets of universities: the losers, the winners, and the mediocres. I was keen to know why they are located there. What is the commonality between the universities located in specific state? Whether in terms of their geographical location, in terms of the population which they serve, or the clientele which they serve, in terms of their funding, what is the common between all these three sets of population?
Yeah. So you mean who is a winner, who is loser, and
among the winners, can there be any common trait?
In terms of geographic
in
distribution?
terms of their clientele which they serve, in terms of geographical location, in terms of their own funding?
Yes. Yes. As I've said, I can show you.
I had some experience, yes, like with
Can I help?
Yeah, they have common things in terms of performance. winners perform better in all indicators. They
That's why
have.
I'm trying to ask that. If someone is performing better, what are the basics? Because university has to vary from each other in all possible contexts. Sometimes in geographical location, if you are located in urban location, if you are located in rural location, it has to be different. Similarly, in terms of their clientele, in terms of their specialization, whether it's science or tech university, whether it's a traditional university. Similarly, the population which is coming there. Characteristic, like in case of India, we have very much diversity. So if there is any commonality between the winners, if there is any commonality between the losers.
I think that it's difficult to make some judgments regarding the geographical location, so how the geographical location influences whether university is winner or loser, but we can admit some commonalities in terms of disciplinary profile of
In terms of share of students in educational programs with major in different science. For example, winners have, I think, half of their students body with major in technical science and engineering.
Because this is a kind of specific feature of this funding mechanism, so there are all programs are divided into 3 groups, depending on the costs that are required in order to provide these educational services. And of course, if students have a major in engineering, for example, this program is more costly, and that's why university receive more money for these students.
But I think descriptively, we should try to convince the reader that we are not attributing to the policy an effect which is actually different characteristics of universities. So in what we commented into the paper, we show that there are, some certain commonalities, but at the same time there is also some heterogeneity within. So we are pretty safe on saying that we are not, it is not an effect driven by the size of university or specialization. So we can provide more details trying to convince the reader in that direction. I think it is a good topic.
I have also a short question. And have you looked at the variety between universities within these groups regarding their size? Because it seems that the result that you're trying to interpret, that regional universities, like the losers or universities that don't receive so much money, they can't perform, this performance-based funding is not so effective, maybe because of their low capacity, because, for example, we can look at different size of universities in terms of money that they have. And some universities can improve because of their first, basic funding is quite large. So new scheme can promote some efficiencies. But for some universities, their funding is so low, then they are not capable to improve. They don't have money to invest in some development. So they are. Have you thought about this? You control for size.
Yeah.
But not size in terms of the number of people, but in terms of money, like general budget. Budget.
We have general budgets in that.
Okay, sorry. So
can I just make another comment? There is often in the literature on health and also on education the issue, for example, of looking at performance of hospitals. We have to exactly say the medical specialties that we are comparing with each other. Would it be possible to separate the data such that we could eventually also confirm that if we would only be looking at, for example, the way parts of mathematical and natural sciences, if we would be able to see that the funding in mathematical and natural sciences is having a given effect, and it's not having the same effect on other departments? Because I don't know the degree of autonomy in the Russian universities. If they are very autonomous in terms of
but in any case, this is a good comment in terms of, I think it is mirroring a little bit the other one, which is in the same way we control, so we cannot say which is the exact direction of this potential, different effects. Yeah, but then we can try to control some subject mix indicator. So just to see, for example, if higher concentration of mathematical students, or well, I think we should say something like scientific, humanities, and social science, if it is making a difference. So we know it is making a difference, and it is proven in the paper, on the amount of resources available, because of the formula is paying you more if you come from a specific field. But then we have no idea yet about the potential different reaction because you have a higher proportion of students in that respect. So probably it can be something we can control for, just to be sure that it is not something that is happening because you are using those, you're leveraging different kinds of students, for example. And then,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move to the second presentation. Yeah. Okay, so Kate will present.
No, something like Alexei.
Alexei. Okay, Alexei then. Alexei will present the study on the mergers of universities in Russia that is made together with Tomasa and Margarita.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is just the brief outline of my presentation. So firstly, I would speak a little bit about the policy that we are studying, the merger policy in Russian higher education sector. Then I will provide some literature review, and then I proceed to our methodological strategy that, as you can see here, consists of 3 general steps. So firstly, we homogenize our sample using propensity score matching, then we are estimating efficiency using data envelopment analysis, and finally we employ fuzzy regression discontinuity design in order to identify the causal impact of merger policy on efficiency level. So firstly, several words about the policy that we are studying. So in 2012, Russian Ministry of Education launched a project called Monitoring of Performance of Higher Education Institutions. So this is just a kind of database. So ministry gathers data on different performance indicators from Russian universities. And this database also served as a kind of management tool for managing the higher education sector, because ministry highlighted 7, I would say, principal performance indicators among this large amount of indicators that are gathered in this monitoring. And this tool was used in order to identify the universities with weak level of performance and to make some managerial decisions with respect to these weak universities with weak performance. So this is the mechanism. Actually very simple. We have these 7 performance indicators like entrance exam score, R&D projects, employability of graduates, and so on. And the mechanism is as follows. So for each of these 7 indicators, ministry sets the threshold values. And if one particular university fails to achieve the threshold for at least 4 indicators out of 7, then this university receives so-called inefficient, or better to say, low-performing status. And if the university receives this low-performing status, it means that the probability of being merged to some other university, some strong university, is increased. That's it. Next, the literature. So actually, mergers are a very popular topic in higher education research, and I would split the literature here into 4 general streams. So firstly, this is the studies devoted to motivations for merger activities, then studies devoted to short-run and long-run effects of mergers, factors affecting success or failure of merger policy, and the last one that I would say the most numerous category here is different case studies describing the mergers policy in higher education in different countries. But the stream of literature that is especially important in the context of our research is the literature that studied this link between merger activity and the efficiency level of universities. The evidence here is rather limited. However, we have some studies on Chinese higher education sector and on English higher education sector. In general, if we will summarize the results by all these authors mentioned here, the main conclusion that they have is that, we can observe positive effect of merger activity on efficiency level of universities. However, this effect does not last long. So in general, in most studies, this effect can be observed only, I would say, in the first year after the merger, second year after the merger, but in the long run perspective, the efficiency level turns back to its initial level. Next, so before estimating efficiency and implementing the causal inference procedures, we just highlighted several potential channels through which merger can influence the efficiency level of university involved. So firstly, this is the economies of scale effects, because merger always means the enlargement of the organization. And if the organization becomes larger, then we can expect some spread of administrative costs over the larger output, spread of faculty over a larger number of students, and so on. Secondly, this is the economies of scope effect. For example, if we merge universities with different missions, for example, teaching-oriented university and research-oriented university, we may potentially expect some more efficient joint production of research and teaching. Or, for example, when we are merging universities with different disciplinary profiles, we might expect some efficiency gains due to development of multidisciplinary research and so on. And finally, and maybe I would say the most important point here is the quality of management, because the particular set of management practices that will be adopted in new merged organization is very important for how this new institution will perform. So that's it, and now I'm proceeding to our data and our methodological strategy. So yes, this is our sample. Initially, we have 447 universities that is actually almost all Russian public universities without branches. 38 out of these 447 universities received low-performing status in 2013. And as I've mentioned already, the receiving low-performing status does not mean automatically the merger. So it means just the increase in probability of being merged. That's why only 14 universities out of these 38 were consequently merged to other universities. And what we have decided to make at the first step, so the problem here is that Russian higher education sector is very heterogeneous. Universities are very, very different in different respects. That's why at the first step we decided to homogenize a little bit our sample, and we conducted propensity score matching procedure. So for each university that received low-performing status, we found in the sample 3 most similar universities in our large sample that includes 447 universities. And in order to conduct this propensity score matching, we used these indicators that are used by the ministry for decision making regarding the mergers. And as we can see here, before implementing propensity score matching, there are some differences, significant differences in mean values between treated group and non-treated group. And after the propensity score matching was implemented, these differences become statistically insignificant. So the second step is the efficiency estimation. And in order to estimate efficiency, we used bootstrap DEA approach. And here is the specification of the model that we used. So the inputs are total income from all sources, number of academic staff, and the average entrance exam score as the measure of quality of entrance. And on the output side, we have publications, R&D projects, and students. So very simple specification, and we made several robustness checks. So we use different alternative methodologies for efficiency estimations. For example, we use SFA, quantile regression, efficiency estimation, and also we tried different specifications. So we changed a little bit this list of inputs and outputs. The results were rather stable. And that's why we decided to proceed with this baseline model that is based on the bootstrap DEA estimator. So this is just some descriptive statistics for variables that we used for efficiency estimation. And I have to make one important note regarding how the mergers that we have are represented in our data. So the specific feature of the data that we have is that we observed two separate institutions before the merger. For the year when merger is in progress, we don't have data because these universities do not report. And finally, at the third year, we have the data on new University C that is already merged. In order to balance our panel, we decided to create so-called synthetic organizations. So you can see here that initial data we have University A, University B with inputs and outputs. Then we just summed the inputs of these two universities and outputs of these two universities, and then we obtained so-called new organizations. And in this setting, our data become balanced. So we have the same number of observations for each year that we have. And this is the results of efficiency estimation. So if we will look at the graph on this graph, we can see that in general Russian universities experience productivity decline, and we can see that decline for treated group was lower compared to non-treated group. So this is the kind of descriptive evidence, and in order to prove the causal nature of this effect, we proceeded to the regression discontinuity design. Dependent variable here is the efficiency change between 2013 and 2017. As I have mentioned, we have partial compliance here because not all universities assigned to treatment were actually treated. This partial compliance may cause indigeneity problem, and that's why we employ here a fuzzy version of regression discontinuity design. So this is a kind of instrumental variables approach. And so we have one problem here. We have constructed the forcing variable artificially. So we have the 7 indicators. For each of the 7 indicators, we have a threshold. We have calculated the ratio of observed performance to the threshold performance and averaged these ratios across 7 indicators. And the problem here is that we don't know the cutoff point for this forcing variable. And in order to find this cutoff point, we address the literature on structural breaks. So the approach here is very simple. We consider this kind of regression model where the threshold is an indicator function of the following form, as you can see here, and theta is threshold that we are going to find. And so we have considered a little bit more sophisticated version of this equation with some control variables and so on. But the idea here is that to estimate this regression model for different values of theta, and the theta that corresponds to the regression model with highest R squared. So in this case, we have the optimal level of theta. We have estimated these equations 40 times for different thetas, and we find that the optimal theta is equal to 1.07. So actually, this is our point 1.7, and all universities that lies below this point were assigned to the treatment, and all universities above were not assigned to the treatment. And we use some control variables, this is the results. We employed both parametric and non-parametric approach. In case of parametric approach, this is the two-stage square, and we can see that the treatment effect is positive and statistically significant for specifications where we include nonlinear terms. And for non-parametric estimation, we use local linear regression, and we estimated this model for different bandwidths. And in case of non-parametric estimation, the treatment effect is positive and statistically significant for all specifications. And this is the regression discontinuity plots, as you can see here. So the vertical line here represents our cutoff point, 1.07, and we may observe this gap in the regression line that shows that universities that are treated demonstrated high level of efficiency change between 2013 and 2017. And as we can see here, if we include some nonlinear components in our model, this gap became even higher compared to a linear case. And I'm proceeding to the conclusions, I suppose. So I would just mention a couple of points that can be considered both as limitations and other possible directions of further investigations. So firstly, as I have mentioned in the literature review section, most studies demonstrate that positive effect of merger on efficiency can be observed only in the short run. So here we don't know, because we are analyzing the effect only for the first year after the merger, and we don't know what happens next. So it would be great, of course, to expand somehow the time period that we have and to analyze how this efficiency change evolves over time, whether the efficiency turns back to its initial level on the long run, or these positive effects can be observed in the long run. And the second point is about our methodological strategy. I have mentioned three potential channels through which merger activity can influence the efficiency level, such as economies of scale, scope, and managerial practices. So actually, our methodological strategy allows us estimating the total effect without disentangling it into different particular channels. So this effect, the positive effect that we have found, corresponds to all possible channels that we can even imagine. However, it would be interesting, of course, to try somehow to separate this effect into different channels. I think I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Alexei. Any questions, suggestions, comments?
I just always forget to ask Alexei, why do you estimate theta 40 times?
Okay,
It just bothers me.
I will try to show you. Actually, just to be sure.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, because we have this interval from 4.8 to 1.2, and in terms of our variable, in terms of our performance score, this interval is wide enough. So we can be pretty sure that the optimal theta is somewhere inside this interval.
Well, you know what? We build these forcing variable artificially. So it is not like when you have a clear policy in which there is a clear rule to assign a university to a treatment or not. So we create these artificially, and we have to convince the reader and ourselves for that forcing variable is actually representing a probability to be assigned to the policy. And then there should be a point on which this probability changes its magnitude, right? So we with the normal procedure, we get an interval, so we are sure that it is there, you know, but we read this paper in which they, you know, create something like an artificial forcing variable and then try to estimate precisely where the cutoff point is, and then we say, well, that's exactly what we need. It is something that is, there's a double check that we can find a point into this distribution which is changing really the probability to be assigned to the treatment.
Yeah, and actually it's my mistake because I have in place in the presentation one graph that represents the dependence of how the probability of being treated depends on this performance score.
Exactly.
And if we look at this graph, we will see that at this point, 1.07, there is a sharp jump in the probability of being treated.
I have one question, which is very simple in comparing the sophistication of your presentation. Very much. And I think it's very interesting. The issue is that we are actually comparing efficiency pre and after the merger. But what we really want to know is efficiency. Efficiency only represents the spread in terms of distance to the frontier. But even if this spread is actually, it seems that the average efficiency is getting worse, which means that firms are more far away from the frontier, which might simply mean that the frontier has gone into more productive areas. And this would be very good. So the way that we're seeing this is that some universities are lagging further away from the frontier, and we should also have a measure to see whether the productivity has changed or not. So I'm just wondering if it would be possible to complement this independent variable in terms of productivity changes from merger instead of efficiency values pre and post merger.
Yeah, thank you for this comment. This is exactly what we were discussing with Tommaso. I think this is the point that we have to work on. I think it's possible, so yeah. Thank you.
Basically, you need to try to use a matrix index or something like
Something
that.
that measures evolution of the frontier as well as the spread.
Yeah.
I would like to know about the two factors. Did you consider these factors during your research, or it can be a comment for future consideration? The first is about the management staff. When two universities are merging, they are in two options, I guess. So the management staff is changing, or the management staff is the same as it was before merging. And the second is the area, I mean the structure, infrastructures of the universities. It is factors that have some influence to the merger efficiency.
And what do you mean when we are talking about infrastructure?
I mean the buildings or the colleges, etc.
Whether they are located at the same city or...
Yes,
yeah.
in the
Okay.
same city or in different areas.
Okay.
I think these are important factors.
Yeah. Okay. Let me start from the first point that you have mentioned about management staff. So I'm not pretty sure here, but as I remember, if you will try to analyze the changes in management staff in these universities that we have in our sample, in most cases, the management team of new university that is a result of the merger was one of the management teams from two universities that were merging. So in most cases, of course, there were some other situations. There is some heterogeneity here. What about infrastructure? Mostly, this was the mergers that we are analyzing. Mostly, it was the mergers between universities that are located in the same city, because the procedure. So I have described the mechanism of how this monitoring worked, but in practice, the procedure was a little bit more complicated because if university receives these low-performing status, and I've mentioned it doesn't mean automatically the merger, then the special commission created by the ministry analyze the possible negative consequences of the merger. So it makes the decision whether, okay, we have defined that according to the quantitative indicators, this university should be merged with somebody, but then this commission analyzes qualitatively whether the merger is possible in this particular case. And in most cases, if, for example, we have inefficient university that is located in some city and there are no any universities in this city, so this is the only university in the city, so it's impossible to merge it to somebody. So that's why this university was not merged. So yeah, turning back to your question, mostly all mergers that we have were between universities located in the same area. Maybe they have buildings in different parts of the city, but still they were at the same city.
Do they use all the infrastructures of the merged universities?
I would say yes, because they have the same number. They have number of students that has increased significantly. So I think in most cases, they need all infrastructure that initially was associated with two universities.
Thank you. Very short. Very.
Not directly to the question. Whether merger policy has some negative implication to access and equity. Because in case of not that directly connected, in case of school education level, there are certain states which have supported the idea of merger and has huge negative implication on access and equity.
Yeah,
because the merger policy is very much associated with the quality. And in other words, being judgmental to how our money is being spent. That's why I'm very much concerned that it is so that in the case of Russia as well, that it has certain negative implications to equity and access.
So yeah, it's more a question, and I would say that theoretical merger can cause problems not only for access, but for a lot of other different things. And in our analysis, we state that we are focusing only on efficiency. But of course, there are a lot of other dimensions that we can analyze, and maybe in some dimensions we can find negative effects. And you're absolutely correct that the merger can negatively affect the accessibility of higher education, for example. So yeah, that's true. I think we can imagine a lot of different negative consequences, but in this particular study, we try to concentrate only on economic performance, not economic performance, only on technical performance, technical efficiency. This is the only dimension that we are analyzing. But of course, yeah.
Okay, thank you. To our last and least presentation of Kate Shibanova, we work with Tomaza on autonomous status of Russian universities.
Good evening, everyone. I really thank you for being patient enough to come to the last session today. I'm going to present you a research in progress, which is dedicated to the degree of formal and informal actual autonomy and performance and efficiency of Russian universities in a quite short period of time from 2014 to 2018. So the outline of the presentation will be to present you motivation of the study, so why we actually launched this project, to introduce you to the concept of institutional autonomy, to talk about how the theory would explain why institutional autonomy would be related to performance and efficiency. And I'm going to tell you more in details about Russian context, our research strategy, data, and then the research itself and the results. I have to tell that it would be hard to think about autonomy of universities before the collapse of the Soviet Union, but not necessarily because of any terrifying images you could have in your head, but mostly because of the legislation and the understanding of universities as providers of government will. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, universities became, well, especially in between 90s, universities became new organizations in the sense that they were not just providing governmental will, but they were granting services to the population, and there was a huge marketization of the sector. And Russian higher ed system experienced a range of reforms that were implemented in Europe during, say, 50 years, and we experienced new public management reforms only during the last 10 years. And as we also moved to the necessity to grant financing according to fulfilling of some indicators and KPIs, it has come to our attention that probably it's the same case as in Europe, that universities now have to comply with new criteria and they have to reorganize themselves. And this complexity makes a need to more autonomy in how they manage themselves. So we came to two research questions about how Russian universities differ in their institutional autonomy. And is autonomy formal and autonomy in use, so the informal one related to high performance and efficiency of their activities? So what is actually institutional autonomy in higher ed? In Europe, the tradition of institutional autonomy roots in medieval ages, but we come to the definitions that emerged from 80s and 90s. The literature says and provides mostly vast explanations of what is institutional autonomy. And the basic principle is that it's somehow related to freedom between government control and accountability behind the population. Given the fact that all these definitions were quite vast, some researchers came to the fact that actually autonomy can be multidimensional. And a range of researchers tried to deconstruct this composite notion into, say, academic freedom, autonomy, or freedom to set its own organizational structure, to the procedural autonomy, or autonomy in research activities, teaching activities, and financial expenditures and administration managing, and so on. Okay, and why actually we can even imagine that autonomy can be related to higher performance and efficiency, or somehow related to both of them. There are two main concepts or theories that can help us in this, and we firstly have to say that we believe that general public management theories can be applied to higher ed for two reasons. Well, first because most of them were developed within the context of higher education institutions, and second because most of them were tested empirically on higher ed data. So the two theories we want to use is the managerial approach, which means that basically you have to let managers manage, and they will set wise managerial structures and KPIs for themselves, because they will be interested in what they do, because they can set the incentives by themselves. And the second theory is, it's the basic institutional setting that is set by the government, and the government sets the incentives, and if it provides more autonomy in how managers do their job, they will be more capable to fulfill the targets. There is a bunch of empirical research about how autonomy can be related to efficiency and performance in higher ed context. And some other literature is also dedicated to autonomy in regards with performance and efficiency in other public services, such as healthcare and secondary education, and so on. So regarding the higher ed literature, it basically says that yes, autonomy can be related to more efficiency and performance in higher ed, and I'll just give you an example of Egion et al. That studied European context of higher ed, and they say that more autonomous universities are more efficient and performative just because they have more capacity to respond to competition and to perform on the market and to gain more revenues, and that's why they gain more money, and they can invest this money and become more performative. The ugly slide about Russian context, about the Russian higher education system, for those who don't know about it. So basically we have a huge amount of higher education institutions, so more than 1,000. Only half of them is public, but most of the students study in public universities, and half of public universities are branches, half are main campuses. We have a unified state exam procedure of entering universities, and universities gain most of their funding from the governments. That's why we're, just like Kate said in her presentation, universities are very interested in complying with governmental criteria. So about Russian context. Actually, autonomy legislation was implemented before the new public management reforms were applied in Russia. The first law was to separate between three types of universities in Russia. Well, autonomous, which means, like, say, completely free; budgetary universities, say, standard universities; and completely state-owned, using the Russian term казенные. Казенные universities are mostly universities that still provide governmental will and service of training, military forces, etc. Then there was another law on autonomy of educational institutes, and the budget code that provided some changes into the legislation that can be mostly summarized in granting freedom to certain types of universities and how they can use unspent public funding, private income, how they can use private income, how can they make deals and procurements, how they can use their property, and what special governing bodies are there in the universities. Now that we have approximately 50 head state autonomous universities, and the key features that distinguish them from the others are that they have a supervisory board that inter alia is responsible for approval of financial plans, deals, and investments. And autonomous universities can use privately gained money according to their needs. The others cannot. They just have to spend it to zero. Otherwise, they will be underfunded and underfinanced the next period, claimed to be inefficient of using the money. And budgetary universities can do so only in case they have an exceptional agreement from the governing body. So our research strategy was to actually distinguish between the actual and the formal autonomy, because we suppose that the legislation doesn't mean anything, because we checked and we found that even though autonomous universities are capable of investing private money into deposits in banks, only 9 out of 48 universities do this. This gave us a clue that probably we should distinguish between the two. So in order to do so, we built a continuous measure of autonomy using the benefit of the doubt methodology, which I'm going to introduce you a bit later. Then we analyzed the efficiency of higher ed institution in order to thirdly trace the relationship between both formal and informal autonomy and both performance and efficiency of higher ed institutions. So our data comes mostly for the monitoring of higher ed performance. We select the sample with the criteria of no missing, availability, state-head universities, and sports and culture universities excluded, and we get a sample of approximately 400 universities, including 41 formally autonomous universities. To start with the descriptives, well, we can basically say that probably formal autonomous universities are indeed, say, more internationalized. They have more master students, they have more bachelor specialist students in absolute terms, and they have a higher publication activity, but from this point it says us nothing. And we move to the benefit of the doubt. So this is a good methodology in case you want to build a continuous measure of something, say a composite indicator, but you're not quite sure what weights you can assign to each of these subcomposites. The benefits of the doubt works like a linear maximization problem, so it tends to maximize the final score of the indicator for each of the units of analysis by assigning the optimal weights to each of the indicators you use for building the index. To build the index, we use 3 sub-indices, of which are academic freedom, financial independence, and operational staff management. We have selected these 3 sub-dimensions, firstly because they were all presented in the literature as potential subcomposites of autonomy of higher ed institutions, and secondly, because all of them are partly regulated by the laws of the Russian Federation. So say financial independence is mainly regulated by the law of autonomy, operational staff management, about the compliance of staff salaries with the average regional salary is regulated by a presidential decree, and academic freedom is mostly regulated by granting several universities a right to develop extended rules of admission and extended standards of their educational activities. So after calculating these 3 sub-indices, which are basically normally distributed, and using the minimal possible weight of 20%, we have found that, well, actually there is some overlapping between the formal and non-formal and formally autonomous and formally non-autonomous universities in terms of their informal autonomy, and this gives us a clue that probably somewhere in between this interaction there can be an effect on performance and on efficiency. So then we use the DEA methodology in order to measure efficiency of universities. It's a standard output-oriented variable returns to scale method. For inputs, we just use total income and come with a simple model which Tommaso likes a lot. As outputs, we use for teaching total number of Russian bachelor, specialist, and master students, and for research, we use the number of publications. We don't know the dropout ratio, but on average in Russia it's very low. So we can say that most of the students graduate. So we get the scores, which are also normally distributed, and well, this is just a next step to proceed. to the small picture of how can it be related autonomy to efficiency. Well, probably there is no relationship, but still, let's give it a try. We use fixed effects panel data regression, and we use two dependent variables. The first comes for performance, which is number of publications per research staff capita, and the second is for efficiency. And we try to explain it through formal, non-formal autonomy and the interactions between, and using some control variables such as unified state exam scores, share of R&D income, etc. So here comes a lot of tables. Probably I should skip them and come right to the conclusions because it must be very boring to look at the figures. So what we get about the performance? First of all, we were quite successful in building the autonomy in use index, but we have to say that financial independence remains the main component of the informal autonomy that weighted on average 40% during the period. Then we have to say that autonomy in use tends not to demonstrate any significant relationship with the number of publications a university can produce, but we try to disentangle this and use separate sub-indexes as predictors for publication activity. And we can see that actual academic freedom and financial independence alone have a positive and statistically significant effect on publication performance. Probably this can come due to higher selectivity processes in these universities and the fact that have more talented students and higher human capital. And regarding the financial independence, well, it can be just they can invest more money into publications, conference activities, proofreadings, etc. Regarding the efficiency, here, vice versa, autonomy in use can result into a 5% percentage gain in efficiency with each percentage gain in informal autonomy. Academic freedom alone can result into a 15 positive effect on institutional efficiency, while financial independence plays a negative role. Well, probably it happens because the more you invest, the harder it's to maintain efficiency relative to the output you get. Staff management sub-index does not show any significant relationship, and on average, leading universities tend to be less efficient, but it's okay because you don't expect large organizations to be efficient. It's hard to manage their capacity. That's it. For the discussion, we have to say that the proceeding of the research is going somewhere beyond the figures and providing a more meaningful explanation of the statistical analysis. Extending the robustness by using some fancier methodologies such as conditional efficiency modeling, and probably we can rearrange our autonomy and use index and extend our timeline because, well, basically all the indicators we have are only available for the period we have. Probably we can change it and come to a larger period. That's it. I hope I'm in time, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions, comments?
So, the autonomy generally creates an issue of accountability. So, I just want to know about the accountability of the institution. Who is within the body looking for accountability? And the second thing is the negative externality of autonomy. There are some negative externalities.
Well, I bet it's easier to start with the first one. In Russia, universities can, well, all the universities can be either subordinated to the Ministry of Higher Education and Science, either to some field-specific ministries, which is the legacy of the Soviet Union, say the Ministry of Agriculture has its own universities, or the parliament, just like the HSC, it's subordinated to the parliament. But all the accountability things are related to, well, many bodies. Say all the financial activities have to be reported behind the Ministry of Financing. We have to comply with the monitoring of performance behind the Ministry of higher education in science, and so on. So it's a rather multi-level governance, multi-level accountability that follows it. What I would say about negative externalities of autonomy, well, here in Russia, the main negative externality is that formal autonomy may not be necessarily used because it was granted mostly by chance in the 90s, and many of those universities who acquired autonomy are not performing very well. So I don't know whether it's directly related with the autonomy, but it definitely makes the analysis more complicated due to the heterogeneity of those universities.
Can I ask two questions, in fact, in relation to the composite indicator? I'm used to seeing the composite indicator because of the learning input being represented in the outputs by adimensional measures, meaning that a large university and a small university would be compared in that sense. When you showed your numbers, some of them were still volume measures. Did you then convert into something that it would not be implicit that a large university is in equal basis with a small university?
You mean during the efficiency analysis?
No,
during the BOD, right?
In the BOD. Yep, we standardized all the variables, scaled it from 1 to 0, from 0 to 1.
But can you go back to those numbers?
Yeah.
Because it was just a case of the normalization, because you wouldn't need to normalize. The issue is on the starting measure. And then the other question I might ask eventually as well. The 20% was the minimum. You said you had some restrictions on the importance of the indicators, on the importance of the group of indicators from each of the 3 pillars. So within the pillar, you could have some of the indicators being ignored, provided that the group representing the same dimension would have at least 20%. That's right.
If I'm correct.
In these ones,
okay, if I understood you correctly. Yeah, so say, for example, share of private income and share of private income in income from research activities could not comply less than 20% in financial independence, and then financial independence could not comply less than 20% in autonomy.
Okay, so it's
double restriction.
So that's what I was saying.
Yeah. And regarding the scale, we tried to make some robustness.
Because, for example, a very simple example, research and teaching salary. It could be research and teaching salary, or it could be per capita, per individual. So if it is the per individual and then that's normalized, that's okay. If not,
it's per individual.
You can have some site there.
Okay, so initially all of them were already
exactly. So it wasn't about the scale of budget that is used. It's just about the average salary per staff cabinet.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you all for this session. I hope it was quite productive, and I think it's productive. And I hope that it was interesting to you to find out what's going on in higher education management, because it is public administration, I think, because it's more related to these kind of topics. So thank you all for being here, and have a good evening.